Welcome to this free monthly group coaching call that I do. I'm Susan Campbell, as you know. And today I'm going to start a discussion about polarization. And I'm talking about all the different types of polarization that separate us. And my overall premise is going to be that polarization in humans and in human society is normal, but not healthy. There's a primitive drive in humans to fear differences. Carl Jung studied this quite a bit. And so his conclusion was like in the deep in the subconscious, we fear differences. So that's why I say it's normal. But we are going to have to consciously evolve ourselves. We're going to have to do some both inner work and social work if we want to get beyond, like evolve beyond that normal human tendency to feel separate from the other. So that's my overall premise, is to get beyond polarization is going to take inner work. Let me show you a screen share now. These are some of the types of polarization that affect us, I believe, affect us in our civilized world. So I'm going to kind of read through these, and I want you with each one of these to ask yourself, which of these do you participate in a way that has you feeling separate from the other? So we're going to start that way. We're going to just look at the overview of the landscape of polarization. So when I say, have you feeling separate from the other, I think you know that feeling. It's like, they're not like me, or I'm not like them, something like that. So I want us to do an inner inquiry as we look through this list of types. So there's ideological polarization, different kinds of beliefs. Religious beliefs are one of the biggest types. And when I think about my own childhood, were there things that I was taught, for example, that said those people are better or not so good? Like I frankly was taught, don't marry a Catholic because then you have to raise your kids Catholic. Okay, so that put a little separation in me. I did marry a Catholic at one point. I had 4 husbands, but one of them was. So it's not like that really stuck at all. But I want to just warm you up to things that can be in our systems from early on, like that. That may or may not be rational, but they're in us. And we still participate in that kind of othering. So think about your own life. And I wrote down here things like pro-choice versus pro-life. Some of us can get on one side or the other of that. Some people would never own a gun. Some people are sort of moderate about gun ownership. And then some people would, this is a basic human right and you shouldn't be without it. So when I say polarization, there can be a middle ground in all of these. And even that can cause you to feel, well, I'm not like either of those other 2 poles. I'm in the middle. So polarization affects the moderate just as much. Political. And when I say that, and you look at this list here, this is not an exhaustive list. None of these examples are just to get you started. But feel into even how you feel when you look at each one of those words. Words can trigger emotions, right? Any words there, liberal, conservative, anarchist, libertarian, green, any of those words set you up to feel like more warm and fuzzy or more suspicious. Lifestyle polarities. Like some people are suspicious of those of us who use alternative health practices. Talked to my doctor the other day. I said, what do you think of this? She said, snake oil. Okay, so, maybe she's right in this case. Differences of belief, and things like that, like vitamins and such. So think about what affects you in this. Socioeconomic and regional. Like the one that affects me most is the North-South, because I have a lot of relatives in the South. And sometimes when I go to the South, even to this day, I hear people saying things like, we're not so stupid. I don't know if you know that movie and that book, Hillbilly Elegy. This guy who actually now is a politician, I can't think of his name, but it's a great book to give you an insight into the Appalachian mindset, and how painful it is to be felt like you're being put down by, let's say, the people in the North. And there's still some of that dynamic that I pick up sometimes when I travel in the South. That we're not so bad. Some kind of, maybe there's some people here who grew up in the South. Is there anybody? Show of hands. But I've spent a lot of time in the South. I have relatives. Racial, that can polarize in a number of ways, even if we're not of a minority group. Sexual orientation, again, even if we're not in a minority group, somebody can feel very other. So back to the question, where do you feel in these categories? Those people are not like me, or I'm not like them. And then the one major territorial conflict that's up for the whole world right now is the Israeli-Palestine conflict. There's so many polarities within that. And of course, religion is one, as well as territory. But that's in our field right now. And so is there there's positions around that in the US. And so any of that position taking, how's that affecting you, if at all? And then one other kind of polarization is something that I've found that happens as couples develop. So it can be actually work groups can develop this way too. In the beginning, there's a tendency to want to harmonize and emphasize your similarities. And then as the bond gets stronger, the way I say it is more unconscious material bubbles up to be dealt with, and you enter the power struggle stage, and then you see normal human style differences, like the saver versus the spender in a marriage, or any kind of relationship. The person who likes to go out all the time and be very social, and the person who, let's just be with us too. That's enough for me. It's just us as a couple. Things like that. So couples almost always get polarized at some stage in their couple's journey, as I've called it in my book that I wrote in 1980. Okay, so I'm asking you, just feel into, and I'm going to stop the share now. Say a little more. And the thing I want us to think about here is did any feelings come up? Because that's going to be the inner work. It's going to have to start with a feeling of discomfort that comes from some sense of, I'm not like them, they're not like me, this is not a safe situation, something like that.
Avid Trump supporters.
So that creates a sense of separation in you.
Yeah, it's in the political realm.
Yeah,
Yes.
and let me just take that because probably you're not the only one on this call that has that discomfort. Well, let me ask you right now, how many people on this call, because I can see your show of hands now, have a relationship in your life right now where some kind of polar opposite beliefs separate you? And that would be the question Cynthia just brought, somebody who's way on the other political side of the spectrum. So it affects you. There's somebody in your world. So see a show of hands here. And you can use your hand, or you can use your Zoom hand, whichever is more comfortable. So did everybody raise their hand on that one? Seemed like almost everybody did, but I couldn't see everybody at once there.
I didn't, because I don't have anybody in my...
There's nobody in your actual world, right?
Yeah.
So that's less personal. And I am asking for some more personal share about that now. And and I'll speak to it now. There's going to be some kind of discomfort that's going to come up around this. There might be a judgment, a thinking that you're right, and there might let's see, what are some of the ways that we handle this? I'll call it the emotional discomfort of this kind of difference. Maybe there's an avoidance. Okay, so there can be an avoidance of that other person. I'm thinking my brother. My brother's an avid Trump supporter, and I love him very much, and we could actually talk about this. But the first question I had to ask him was, do you think the election was stolen and Trump's really the president? And he said, no, I don't go that far. So I go, okay, I can talk to you then.
Right? Yeah,
I mean?
Kind of basic.
So I mean, that's the way I strategically dealt with that. But let's go deeper. How do I feel about my favorite brother? I've got 3 brothers, but he was my firstborn after me. He was like my baby, and now he's got different beliefs than me. Okay, so you've all got something almost, something like that. What does it feel like? So I'm just kind of warming us up here, and we'll go a little bit further in a minute. But I do want you to actually realize that the healing and the consciously evolving our ability to handle this kind of discomfort, this is what I'm talking about. So the first step is being able to feel the discomfort, to know it's there, to not deny it. Another way to work with this and become a little more conscious of it, we just started to name some of our strategies for dealing with this discomfort. Avoid the person, think you're right, judge the person. So those are just a few of the normal human defense mechanisms we use to not feel the real pain underneath there. So my work is all about expanding the human's capacity to handle emotional discomfort so we can really deal with the tough problems facing us today, or so that we can see the handwriting on the wall, or so that we can feel the trauma that's underneath there in our systems, in our childhood wounded parts, and bring those into relationship with the whole person. So I'll be touching on that a little bit more in a minute, because we got to look at, well, what do we do? How can we heal this? Yeah, Darcy, you had a question.
First of all, hi, and Doug sends his love. What could you repeat, like what types of strategies? Like for me, I see the villain victim come into play, ignoring and the superiority, inferiority.
That's a good one.
What else did you mention?
Avoidance,
Avoidance.
avoiding judging us superior, inferior is like judging. All the usual, like all the usual ways that we deal with somebody when we think that they are different from us, and there's some, and we're able to be, well, actually, we don't have to be. I was going to say we're able to be aware of some fear there. Usually we're not in touch with the fear. And my work is to help us get in touch with the fear, but see what the fear is really about. So
I noticed that there's a lot of grief, like all the thoughts about like, wow, we're missing so much. We have this situation with the grandkids, and it's like, if the parents weren't born again Christian Trump supporters, we would be like living next door to those grandkids, you know? And it's like, but would we want that? You know, would we want to live with that constant conflict or just not knowing how to handle it?
there's a way to handle it, but it takes a lot of inner work and also social work, interpersonal work. And you know, I'm not going to go deeply into the kind of work that's possible today, but I'm going to guide us in a little bit of the work, and then talk about some of the social interventions that I've done in my work with groups and organizations. Scott, you have your hand up.
Yeah, you just said something that made me want to ask a question, which was, to what degree we're doing these things consciously.
Right.
Meaning, and it really made me wonder, like, how, in your opinion, I'm curious, you know, how much of this is, you know, like trauma response, just fight, flight, freeze, you know, we're just, like you say, avoiding doing that, it's that.
Well,
Meaning something that we're actually not choosing.
yeah, it's all of these strategies for managing the pain of separateness are unconscious, and they're things that we learned at a very early age. So let's talk about that. Because I was going to go into that, how we deal with any kind of, first of all, frustration or sense that we're not in a safe environment. So the very first stage of a human development is where we get our information, where we make our judgment. Is the universe friendly? Erik Erikson, the famous developmental psychologist, talked about that being the stage. And I'm talking about the first couple of years of life now, where you develop a basic trust or a basic mistrust in life, in yourself. And we don't even know what happened back then, most of us. Okay, it's all repressed. A little later, we do remember certain traumas of having a lot of conflict in the home. So if any of this is your story, chaos in the home, just any kind of lack of safety, then we're going to develop these, let's call them defense mechanisms against feeling pain. So, you know, denial's our biggest one in this culture, and I think it's the favorite one of humans, is you just shut down because, and when you're traumatized, that's the natural human response, is to freeze, to not take in any more painful stimuli. So almost all of us have shut down places in our background where the feelings didn't get fully felt, the wants didn't get fully felt, or the upset about not getting the wants met didn't get fully felt or expressed even. So there's this little human organism that's naturally got wants and wants to receive love, you know, basically. And the impulse toward reaching out gets blocked because it's punished. And so there's some then lack of capacity that the child starts to have, and then he compensates by, you know, trying to be a big shot or a phony or look good or be in control or be right or be rich. So these are all compensations for the basic human needs not being met. But the more psychological ones are like what we talked about, thinking you're right, judging, that sort of thing. So we all have to start coming to terms with the fact that we're probably got some damage back there that gets projected on to these adult situations, these adult uncomfortable, frustrating situations. And the way to use these adult frustrating situations for our own healing and for social healing is to start with, ooh, that was frustrating. Okay, first you're in judgment. Okay, so you don't even know that was frustrating, but you've got a judgment. Like, okay, the avid Trump supporter, Cynthia said, okay, there, we've got some kind of a judgment. And then Elisheva talked about the family not being able to see each other or, see the grandkids and that sort of thing. There's pain there, or there's some kind of discomfort, even in judgment. So if you can start with judgment or whatever pain you're aware of, and just pause and feel what's that like right now. So Elisheva told us, it was obvious there's pain. We could be seeing these grandkids, but there's political beliefs in the way. Or, with Cynthia, when you're saying avid Trump supporter, or I could say about my brother, there's pain there if it's personal, if this is somebody you care about. And maybe there's even pain there just from being a party to this kind of separation, being in a world where there's so much of this us them. There's pain about that. There's pain about the conflicts and the wars that we're witnessing right now. Most of us have some kind of feeling about that that's real. So we start with that. So if you can, like right now, if you think about and bring back a feeling of something that's frustrating, I might feel the separation with my brother. And if you stay with just that feeling, it'll give you more of a capacity to feel discomfort. You might not, the work really is, it's what I call trigger work. The work really is start with anything uncomfortable in the world or anything you resist, either socially or in your interpersonal life, or even with yourself. You have a painful thought, a judgmental thought towards yourself. Start with anything painful. Breathe, make space for that to be there, and let that, call it a part of yourself. Call it an unhappy, frustrated, upset, perhaps traumatized part of yourself. And if you just sit with that and feel it and explore it, sometimes it'll move around in your body. Sometimes you'll get a memory of something similar, like we did in one of these Zoom calls where we did a few of them about being triggered by the world situation. So I could get a show of hands right now, how many people are triggered by something in the world situation. And, I imagine whether you call it being triggered or not, this guy that I worked with on the call, and his trigger had to do with the idea that somebody was going to force him to be vaccinated. He wasn't actually being forced to be vaccinated, but that idea was in his mind. And when he went into it a little bit more, and that's of course one of those social polarities right now, or polarizations. I want to use those words differently. He got in touch with an authoritarian father, and that this really brought back what he thought the authorities were doing to him was so similar to the way he felt as a youngster with his authoritarian father. And so sometimes a memory like that will come up. So I want to say something about polar. Well, does anybody else have any questions first? Because there's also polar opposites in personality styles. And there's so much that can be learned from relationships, from relationship conflict. So, so one of the things I said was, we can learn a lot from our reaction to the world situation. And now I'm going into, we can learn a lot about how to heal this in our intimate relationships. So let me pause though and hear what your thought is, Scott.
I just, as you were talking about, parts, like sound like kind of going into parts work, it had me think about polarizations inside myself.
Yeah.
And which frankly is what I'm more interested in these days.
Good. Yeah. That's almost the easiest place to work. And because let's say you've got an inner critic, that's one of the bigger ones, is people have an inner critic part. And then
Yeah, good example.
Would that be a good example?
Yeah.
And so if I just start with whatever the feeling is there, I might realize, I might find an early memory, a traumatic memory, or many of them, where I was harshly criticized or held to perfectionistic standards in some way by an adult who just wasn't realistic about what you can expect from a child, or perhaps an adult who was too self-oriented and didn't really have space for another person's needs. So that kind of thing happens all the time with children. And so we have these disowned parts. Maybe the inner critic doesn't, in a sense, is rejecting some other part that feels weak, that feels like I'm too young to do this. Because all of us as children had most people were older than us when we were little, and they knew how to do things, and almost all of us had too much expected of us at times, unless we were completely neglected, and that's another kind of too much expected. So there's going to be this not good enough part in almost all of us, because we weren't. We were little. And if we can find that, like that not good enough part, for example, when we just sit with this, and what the attitude of, wow, you're this little part of me that I love and I can empathize with. So every part, if we sit with the discomfort, we're going to find those missing parts that we've tried to disown. And I call this the whole making process. I call this, bringing all the lost parts back into the whole. And this whole making process, if we learn how to do it with ourselves, we have a map for how to do it in the world. It's more complex in doing it in the world, but it has to do with starting with the feeling. And owning my own feeling about something, and sitting with a certain amount of tension and discomfort. So that's the part that's hard, that in this whole making work, this trigger work, we need to start our inquiry fully resourced by breathing, getting our feet on the floor or our butt on the chair, feeling our body sensations. We need to have a grounding in the body and in our connection to ground. And breath is another big resource. So those resources, breath and body sensation, they pave the way for, that's like you're this giant good mother we all need to learn how to do this for ourselves. And nobody teaches you how to do this. I'm this giant good mother, and I'm making space for what starts out as some resistance to somebody else, or some pain about some internal conflict, like the not good enough and the inner critic. And if I feel into this, what's going to usually happen over time, whether you have specific memories or not, you're going to get this vague sense that there's some patterned way that I am that's familiar, or some patterned feeling that I have of, gee, you know, why does life always do this to me? So it's like the story of my life kind of feeling. And if we stay with that and be curious, we find out so much about these repressed memories that we have. The repressed memories will come up a little by little, you know, over, let's say, a 30-year period of your life, when you're in your growth phase, when you're in your high emotional growth phase. I'll just call it 30 years. I don't know. Everybody's different, but I want to emphasize, it doesn't happen overnight. You know, you don't just do a few workshops or, you know, do therapy for a year and you're done. Usually, it can go fast. It really depends on how much time and effort and discipline you have to put into your own personal growth. But anyway, Scott, you see that I think it all goes back. Even the world conflicts. It's like some of us at least grew up in unsafe and chaotic environments, or insensitive environments, and we recreate societies that allow us to continue to play out our traumatized self. And we're not doing the conscious, you know, it's really hard socially as a whole society to do the conscious work of what's this bringing up in me. If we can be a group of cohesive people who are, let's say, people who have family members who are Trump supporters and feel a little bit out of connection with them in some painful way. You know, if that community would work together on, okay, this is what it feels for me. Well, this is what it feels for me. I remember I used to do, I guess you'd call them encounter groups, growth groups, back in the Vietnam War era. And these were for business people, mostly men in those days, because they were sent by their company, they were managers. And in that era, we had the hawks and the doves. Probably hardly anybody remembers the hawks and the doves, but this was huge. Ken remembers. This was a huge polarization in our whole society. And so you meet with a group, and that polarization is in the room. You've got like 12 people, let's say, and maybe you've got 7 on one side and 5 on the other. I mean, it would, in the groups that I led, it would divide out almost like half and half, maybe a little bit more doves, because, well, they would come to a group. But see, they didn't self-select to come to the group. They were sent by their company. And after 5 days of sitting with one another and just talking about their own personal pains, and then sometimes it would come to, you know, how I'm hurt by the way you feel about me as a hawk. You know what hawks and doves mean. Hawk was the, you know, we got to go in and we got to do this Vietnam War. And the doves were like, what if we had a war and nobody came? You know, it was like, we don't need this war. So that's what hawks and doves are. But you can imagine when you sit in a room long enough with the people. So this is more the social healing part of it. And we need more structures where this kind of social healing can happen. But they still exist. But I'd like to see more of them. So people began to go, well, how could you be working for Lockheed and you're making airplanes that are part of the war effort, doesn't that bring you conflict? And once people got kind of into each other's lives and understood each other as human beings, they could actually talk about those issues in a very human way, non-defensive, and they could actually understand why the other person took the position that they did. And the differences were still there, but the otherness wasn't. And this can happen. This can happen. So, I've seen it happen in a lot of different settings, and I don't want to go into too much of that right yet.
I just realized,
Yeah.
I just realized that we have had trauma after trauma after trauma, in our lives, especially lately. And it's just the value of this work. If we keep touching on these old wounds and sit with ourselves so we can have the capacity to sit with others, I think we need to do this more now than ever before. It's my opinion.
Yeah, well, maybe crisis leads to opportunity. I don't know, but these crises today seem, socially seem to be leading in a very, very negative direction, because if your social body is polarized, you can't make any decisions for the betterment of humanity, so we're stuck in our ability to solve problems. And maybe a lot of us grew up in homes like that. Maybe there was conflict in the home where nothing really of value could be forwarded, because we were just dealing with our own addictions or conflicts, emotional conflicts. And so owning that that's in our background, and owning the traumatic situation that's around us, like the corruption, that kind of thing, the materialism, the whole reward system based more on progress and material growth, all of these things, these are currently traumatizing us in a sense, because we feel powerless, because systems are out of our control. So then if I'm going to feel powerless, where's that? How can I actually expand my capacity to experience what powerlessness, in quotes, feels like? It's not like I'm powerless, but that's a valid kind of feeling to let in. Because if I can hold it, and if I can hold my own with compassion, I cannot be so afraid of uncomfortable feelings. And that's going to be the key to healing, is the capacity to sit with somebody who's very different from myself and actually listen, and not run away through my normal habits of judgment and avoidance, being right, all that kind of stuff. Can I really do that kind of work? Let's do the inner work, and then there's also the social work. And it's so hard not to feel some kind of againstness, some kind of I don't approve of that, and to act that out. So starting with the againstness and feeling, what's that like, and what's that protecting me from? Sometimes you have to sit with these questions a little bit to get a clue. Well, for me, one thing, what's that againstness, or that taking position, because taking a position has me feel more powerful. Pointing the finger has me feeling more powerful. When there's a powerless feeling, maybe it's an I'm just a little kid and I'm watching this conflict and I'm so inadequate to deal with it. It can start bringing us to that. And healing the pain around that simply means, when I say healing, I mean owning that really happened to me. It doesn't mean it doesn't matter anymore. That's not what healing is like, or that doesn't even bother me anymore. No, healing is every time something comes up that reminds me of that, I can touch into, okay, I've kind of been there in my own childhood. Kind of felt helpless to deal with a conflict, sitting in the back seat and my parents are in the front seat fighting and I'm not sure if they're going to have a wreck. That's not really my story, but that's but I have sat in the back seat hearing my parents in conflict. I never was that scared. It wasn't that scary, but I've heard many people, where it's scary and they felt they were supposed to do something about the conflict. And so that holding space for the kind of discomfort that was very, very real, but you never got to feel. Letting the feelings come, letting the terror come in. It's like coming to terms first with the pain in your own life, then you have more capacity to go into like a social situation. Like I've worked with this movement called the Empathy Circle movement. It's a wonderful movement. You can Google empathy circles and you can get trained to be an empathy circle facilitator for free. It's a happening thing. Basically what it does is it invites people from two sides of the political aisle, and it can be red and blue, or it could be pro-life, pro-choice, but some issue, and you active listen. I think you know what active listening is. You listen to what the other person's saying in a way where you're open enough to repeat back what you heard them say in a way that shows that you get it. And if you don't get it, you ask some questions, tell me more about this. And so people pair up and they do those empathy dyads. If we don't join the empathy movement, we can still do that with our loved ones if you're willing to try to take the leadership and set the context. I mean, maybe you don't have to when I say take the leadership and set the context, what I generally mean is, hey, Al, my brother, let's try this exercise that psychologists always do with their couples clients. Have you ever been in couples therapy? No, we don't need it. Well, there's this exercise. It's my brother, this is exercise where the other person talks about, why I like Trump. And then, you talk about that. And then I repeat back to the best of my ability what I heard you say and so forth. And so you explain it. That's what I mean by setting the context and taking leadership. So you can do it that way. Or sometimes in the middle of a spontaneous conversation, you can say, could we slow down here? I want to see if I heard what you just said. That's a little less effective because the other person doesn't know what game is being played. I always believe that if it's appropriate that you actually set a conscious context, because it just has a better likelihood of working. So that whole empathy work, active listening work requires the skill that I often teach about, the skill called holding differences. That ability to want what you want and feel what you feel and be talking to somebody who feels something different than you without being threatened that you're going to lose something. Like, you can still have your own wants and your own point of view. This is super important in a marriage. No, okay, he wants to move to the country and we're living in the city and I don't want to move. So I want you to have what you want, but I really don't want to give up what I want. And when I've worked with couples who have to hold one of those kind of differences that almost feels irreconcilable, first of all, if you can hold a difference long enough and keep dialoguing, this is where people are just way too impulsive, and we don't know how to do that yet. That's what I'm saying. We need to consciously evolve our ability to handle these differences and this polarization. We need more capacity if we're going to solve the kind of problems we're facing now. But holding differences among couples, I've seen miraculous things. I've even seen changes in the monogamy, non-monogamy, I mean, resolutions of that issue. And I usually recommend that if you have that difference, you don't get together, you know, hey, don't ask for trouble. But sometimes couples are in it so deep, and now they're into the monogamy, non-monogamy, and they learn to just, okay, you know, I can empathize with what, I mean, actually, sort of happened in one of my marriages. As soon as we got married, he said, I can't be monogamous. And he explained to me, he said, you know, when I was younger, I wasn't very attractive to women, and now I am, you know, now I'm married to Susan Campbell, and we're doing couples workshops all over the world, and I'm so attractive that women want to get with me. And I could empathize with that. Oh, he'd never had that before, feeling desired. I didn't want it. And, you know, when we held differences, and this was one where it didn't work out, you know, that's the difference that broke us up. But we stayed with it for several years, and we talked about it in the groups we were leading, and I had therapy about it. But the process, and we stayed friends and all that. But I'm just giving you this as an example of, I didn't lose myself, but I could empathize with, oh yeah, I kind of understand why you would, you know, want that sexual freedom for the stage of your life now that you're a hot guy. So even if our marriage didn't work out, we learned something through that process of holding our differences. Neither one of us were giving in, but we were empathizing all the way. And very often in couples, particularly, if you can kind of hold any difference, whatever the conflict's about, and just keep talking about it, some conflicts in couples, they don't ever go away. They just keep recurring. You know, I'm always irritated by how, let's say this is a common couple thing, by how long you take to get to the point. Simple like that, you know. There's the quick processors and the slower processors. You know, that doesn't bother us in the romance stage, but later on it begins to create conflict. So those personality style differences are usually things that won't change very much. It's not like I'm gonna get him to get to the point quicker, you know. So being able to talk about differences. So this is another aspect of holding differences, and this may be one of the things that we have to learn socially and politically as organizations. Being able to just talk about our differences and really hear the other person. What I see in I've actually learned this from my clients in couples counseling. It makes it so much easier to deal with the problem if we can talk about it. And my frustration with you not getting to the point. Also, we should be doing some trigger work about that. You know, what's that about, that you're so frustrated that it, you know, takes, you know, extra 5 sentences to find out what she's saying. You know, how come that bothers you so much? So being curious about our frustrations, but also being willing to sit in the frustration is just such a huge life skill, but a very unpopular practice, I think. So let me ask you just what's coming up now for you, any of you, in terms of any of these polarization type things that are real for you? Any comments or questions? anything. I'd just like to hear from you, and we'll dialogue. Darcy. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. The first thing that came up was the Israel Palestine situation, because I have family there. And then the second thing that's coming up for me is the holding differences. I have differences with people at work. They sign on and say, oh, I want, to work 3 days a week. And then eventually they change, sometimes people change their mind, and it's been happening a lot lately. And it's very triggering. It's very upsetting to me. And I'm doing my best. So I'm in this process right now with about 4 people who work for me. And it's this constant evolving, and it's more so now than it's ever been. And I'm just bringing up a lot, like it's bringing up fear and like terror.
Yeah.
Stability, and it's hard to relate. And I'm trying to be professional and calm and empathize with them when I have all this subterranean stuff. So I'm really seeing that I have to do more self-soothing and
really owning how stressful it is the, I think, the first step. This is really almost too much. And I get this from a lot of people, whether it's about, the world situation or just their own family, like for you, it's the world and the work. So like, wow, what does this really feel like? Whoa, this is too much for me. And being able to kind of isolate that part, but not until you've resourced yourself. And this is the hard part, because learning to resource ourselves when there's so much stress going on, it's kind of like not where you want to go. You probably want to go into denial or avoidance or something like that. And I mean, isn't that what most of us do most of the time? A kind of functional denial. And I'm not judging that at all, because this is our world right now. Does seem like we humans we don't have the human development, like the ability to cooperate, to solve the problems facing humanity. Doesn't look like we do. I mean, like people say, well, the solutions are there, like alternative energy would be, okay, solutions are there. I don't know the science here, but the solutions are there, but the politics won't let it happen, because we can't even get anything done in the U.S. Congress, for example. But the healing is going to have to be facing the fact that each of us needs more capacity to deal with what seems like an impossible situation. We need the capacity to even like, oh, how do I feel when I define it that way? One of the things that can be your saving grace, let's call it, can be if you have a growth mindset and you realize that one way you're not powerless is expanding your capacity to handle the normal emotional discomfort. I mean, because whatever, everything's emotional, everything's normal. Let's just call it, let's forget the word normal. The emotional discomfort that's within you and around you that's causing all this stress. Just knowing that a few practices, like the trigger work hole-making practice of sitting with the feelings after you've created an open space, other practices like active listening with your peers and your loved ones, those kind of things can really do a lot. I've worked with a lot of groups. I just want to see if there's anything, and I've done a lot of conflict resolution in groups, but I'm not sure that's going to be relevant to most of us on this call. Although one thing is kind of an interesting one that we could do in our lives, which is take the other's position. I used to, in high school, I was on the debate team. And one of the things we had to do with, so you're debating two sides of an issue. And you had to be able to debate both sides of the issue, because once you got to the place where you're going to do the debate, you didn't know which side of the issue they were going to tell you to take. So to me, that's a tremendously valuable discipline. It's like, okay, where does my brother come from? And I know enough about him. Well, part of it's his social group. He's extremely social and kind of like wants to be loved. And so he's got this whole social group of people who play golf together and so forth, and they're all Republicans. So he doesn't care that much. I know my brother, he doesn't care that much, but he needs to get along with his wife, and he needs to get along with his friends. And just feeling into what's that like, though. It's not just, it sounds a little bit like I might be judging him right now, but what's that really like? Yeah, I can relate to that. So somehow getting yourself in the other side of whatever your positionality is another useful practice. But these things, you have to be interested in doing them. The thing is, if we're going to deal with this, what I call this natural human phenomenon of polarization and fearing differences, if we're going to evolve beyond that, we have to decide we want to. And we have to confront our denial and avoidance every day. But I think the most important and easiest place actually to start is on the inner plane, because once you do learn to handle the emotional discomfort that's buried inside of you and hold that with compassion, there's a kind of inner strength and trust in life that makes you more able to deal with some of the social chaos. And there's one final solution that I want to add, and that is Margaret Wheatley, a famous organizational psychologist, has this term that she calls islands of sanity. Now, a lot of us have thought about that a long time ago. Find your own tribe, build your community, just have like an island of people that it's tough, it'll be tough enough to deal with your own community, but find yourself a social group that actually fits with you. It's not like you're having to make other people something evil. You realize the impossibility of total harmony on the planet right now. And you can at least create some kind of community within yourself, even if it's just like a few friends, that sort of thing, or the people at work. So the summary basically is there's the inner work, there's the social work, which is active listening is one of the main tools. And then there's the communal practice of finding your people that you can feel completely safe with. That's okay. That doesn't mean you're necessarily creating more division. Because even within your little island of sanity, there's going to be conflicts. There's going to be things, and do the work in a safer module. And that will help us all evolve those skills that we need for an unknown future. So good luck. I'll say bye for today, and see you guys next time. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Bye.
Thank you, Susan.
Good luck out there.
Stop, there we are.